The breach occurred at 0347 GMT 1999-07-14, irrevocably altering the fate of the Hoddle Reach I deep-sea drilling platform within the hostile abyssal plain off the Antarctic shelf. Designed for extreme pressure and temperatures, the experimental rig pushed the boundaries of human endurance and corporate ethics, targeting geothermal veins miles beneath the ice-choked surface. Foreman Elias Vance, overseeing the final descent of the primary drill head, reported an anomalous density reading, followed by an unprecedented structural tremor felt throughout the entire 12,000-meter column. Sensors then registered a penetration not of basalt, but of an intricate organic crystalline lattice whose internal structure and luminous pulsations defied standard geological and biological classification, suggesting a geometry fundamentally alien to human comprehension. Immediately, a complex harmonic resonance, later dubbed the Abyssal chorus, saturated all communication channels and infiltrated the insulated bulkheads, bypassing auditory perception to vibrate within the very bones of the crew. Disorientation, acute nausea, and profound psychological distress became immediate symptoms amongst the isolated personnel. Subsequent official reports issued by the Arctic Research Consortium deliberately obfuscated the incident's true nature, attributing the subsequent distress calls to equipment malfunction and extreme psychological duress under unprecedented operational conditions. The consortium's narrative, however, failed to account for the pervasive low-frequency hum that now resonated through every structural girder of Hadal Reach I, a vibration far beyond any engineering specification for mere operational stress. Deckhand Marcus Thorne, meticulously logging pressure differentials in Sector 4, found his movements sluggish, his grip on the stylus intermittently faltering, a tremor not of cold, but of inexplicable unease. The recycled air, usually a neutral constant, now carried a distinct, almost metallic tang, a bitter taste that clung to the back of his throat despite countless sips of desalinated water. Elsewhere in the primary control room, Chief Engineer Lena Petrova meticulously cycled through power conduits, the rhythmic pulse of the main thrusters suddenly seeming uncalibrated. A deep, persistent thrumming, a fundamental bass frequency, layered itself over the familiar mechanical symphony, feeling less like an auditory perception and more like an internal pressure behind her eardrums, a dull ache that resonated bone deep. She initially dismissed it as accumulated fatigue, a common and accepted hazard of extended deep-sea assignments. The banks of fluorescent lights flickered with increasing frequency across the command center, casting erratic, lengthening shadows that danced across complex schematics detailing the rig's structural integrity. Crew members exchanged terse, uneasy glances in corridors and common areas, their faces pale under the harsh, intermittent illumination. Conversations grew clipped, often punctuated by sudden involuntary shivers that had no apparent correlation to the rigorously maintained internal temperature. The isolated environment, once a test of mental discipline and resilience, was subtly transforming into a crucible of unspoken anxieties, a pressure cooker of escalating paranoia. Dr. Aristorn, the rig's resident xenobotanist, usually immersed in microfauna analysis, found himself staring for long minutes at the faint, distant bioluminescence visible through the reinforced portholes of his lab, convinced he was perceiving impossible patterns within the abyssal darkness that could not exist. The abyssal chorus, though often subliminal, created a profound and pervasive cognitive dissonance, making even simple calculations a struggle and rendering restorative sleep a fleeting, fragmented escape. The pervasive cold of the deep ocean felt deeper, seeping into bone marrow despite the environmental controls, a chill that promised something ancient. Even the reliable thrum of the life support system began to feel like a distant, distorted, yet increasingly demanding heartbeat. The pervasive thrumming intensified, no longer merely an auditory presence, but a physical vibration resonating deep within bone and tissue, a relentless internal pressure that warped perception. Marcus Thorne, now routinely misplacing tools and forgetting simple commands, found the holographic schematics on his console shimmering, their precise lines blurring into impossible geometries, reminiscent of the breached structure's aberrant lattice. The metallic tang in the recycled air grew acrid, a persistent bitter chemical taste that seemed to emanate from his own sinuses, coiling with a faint, cloying sweetness. Chief Engineer Lena Petrova, meticulously monitoring the power grid, registered unexplained energy spikes and troughs across all main conduits, despite diagnostic reports indicating full system integrity. The Abyssal chorus now presented as a fluctuating, energetic drain, demanding an unseen tribute. It was a rhythm that bypassed the ears, settling instead into the prefrontal cortex, a persistent, demanding drumbeat that dictated involuntary muscle spasms and erratic breathing patterns amongst the crew. Sleep offered no escape. Fragmented, vivid dreams plagued them, filled with impossible angles and the chilling sensation of immense, unseen biomass pressing against the rig's reinforced hull. Dr. Eris Thorne, his usual scientific detachment eroded, spent hours staring at the portholes of his lab, observing abyssal bioluminescence shift through an unsettling spectrum of colors, patterns pulsating with an undeniable hypnotic synchronicity with the internal hum. Crew members reported fleeting, distorted reflections in polished surfaces and sudden acute aphasia, forgetting common words mid-sentence, the vacuum of silence instantly filled by the low, demanding resonance. Communications with the surface grew increasingly sporadic, bursts of static momentarily giving way to garbled human speech before being consumed again by the pervasive low-frequency hum, an echoing distortion of their own terror. The crushing weight of the deep ocean began to feel less like an external force and more like a profound internal compression, squeezing not merely the Hadal Reach eye, but the very minds trapped within it. A chilling premonition of ancient sentience permeated the very atmosphere, turning the isolated vessel into a vibrant, resonant conduit for an unspeakable, evolving dread. A growing, inexplicable compulsion gnawed at their collective sanity, a subtle whisper in the depths of their thoughts, urging them towards an unknowable purpose, a ritualistic inclination towards the breached void below. The subtle whisper mutated, solidifying into a distinct, insistent rhythm that no longer merely echoed but commanded. The abyssal chorus, once a pervasive hum, now resolved into complex, fractal patterns of sound, each oscillation carrying an undeniable directive. Elias Vance, his mind a battlefield of fragmented thoughts and alien suggestion, found his gaze drawn repeatedly to the drill schematic, to the point of breach, a single, pulsating locus of impossible geometry. He observed crew members, usually precise and methodical, moving with a dreamlike, synchronized purpose through the dim corridors, their movements eerily coordinated. They bypassed safety interlocks, recalibrated drilling parameters, and rerouted power conduits with a silent, methodical precision that belied their outward confusion. The metallic tang in the air now tasted of ozone and something akin to scorched earth, a flavor that seemed to coat the inside of their mouths, demanding a visceral response. Lena Petrova, despite conscious efforts to resist, found herself manually overriding failsafe protocols, her fingers moving with an autonomy that terrified her, guided by an unspoken directive emanating from the pervasive resonance. The deep-sea pressure gauges on her console displayed impossible readings, fluctuating wildly between extremes that should have imploded the rig, yet the structure held, vibrating with a grotesque vitality. Dr. Eris Thorne, no longer making any pretense of scientific observation, began meticulously sketching the non-Euclidean patterns that now ghosted across every surface, shimmering in the periphery of his vision. These weren't hallucinations, they were physical manifestations, growing more substantial, their impossible angles challenging the very fabric of spatial perception. He felt an urgent need to touch them, to trace their contours. The rig itself seemed to breathe, its metallic groans no longer mechanical stresses, but resonant exhalations in sync with the chorus. The distant bioluminescence outside the portholes resolved into vast, intricate glyphs, shimmering with an alien logic that beckoned them deeper, promising understanding or perhaps an unspeakable assimilation. Time itself seemed to unspool, its passage becoming elastic, moments stretching into eternities, then snapping back into jarring discontinuity. The crew moved as one, a singular organism directed by an invisible conductor, their individual identities dissolving into a collective consciousness, their purpose fixed on the abyssal void below. The crew, a unified, unthinking extension of the abyssal chorus, began to reconfigure the Hoddle Reach 1 with a terrifying, precise intent. Manual overrides, once safeguards, were now instruments of compelled devotion. Elias Vance, no longer merely observing, stood at the central console, his eyes vacant yet focused, his hands moving with an impossible speed across the holographic interface, rerouting power from critical life support systems to the primary drill head. The non-Euclidean glyphs Dr. Aris Thorne had sketched now coalesced from shimmering optical distortions into solid obsidian-like growths adhering to bulkheads and conduits, pulsating faintly with an internal light. Their impossible angles did not merely defy perspective, they actively bent the surrounding light, creating pockets of oppressive, absolute darkness that absorbed all illumination, even the rig's emergency strobes. The air grew impossibly dense, thick with the metallic tang of ozone and a new, visceral scent, like wet, ancient stone exposed to something burning. Marcus Thorne, his face slick with sweat and eyes wide with unseeing terror, was meticulously feeding raw, untreated fuel into a repurposed hydrostatic pump, his muscles burning from the repetitive motion, yet his will absent. The low-frequency hum escalated into a deafening roar, a sound that no longer merely vibrated, but actively compressed the very air, stealing oxygen from lungs, tightening around craniums. Lena Petrova, her face a mask of silent anguish, watched her fingers connect a series of redundant coolant lines directly into the breach point, a ritualistic act of offering that defied all engineering logic, yet felt utterly necessary. The rig itself groaned, not with structural fatigue, but with a visceral organic tremor, its metal skin rippling as if alive, the entire structure morphing, adapting, becoming something beyond human design. Time fractured further, moments stretching into an eternity of compelled action, then snapping back, leaving fragmented memories of unidentifiable sensations, a brushing against something wet and vast, a faint crystalline whisper from the void below. The abyssal bioluminescence outside, once distant, now pressed against the reinforced portholes, forming kaleidoscopic patterns that mirrored the internal glyphs, creating a terrifying connection, a symbiotic dance between vessel and primordial entity. The very fabric of reality within Hoddle Reach 1 was unraveling, pulled taut by an ancient awakening will. The ancient will, now fully asserted, resonated through every atom of Hoddle Reach I, transforming the vessel into an instrument of its impending genesis. Elias Vance, his eyes glazed, initiated the final sequence, a pulse of raw, rerouted power surging down the drill column, guided by the impossible glyphs that now pulsed with a malignant internal light. The roar of the abyssal chorus achieved a new, terrible pitch, a frequency that not only compressed air, but vibrated the very optic nerves, distorting vision into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors and swirling shadow. The obsidian growths on the bulkheads expanded, their impossible angles now shifting, twisting, manifesting non-Euclidean geometries that warped the perception of space within the rig, making corridors seem infinite or impossibly short. The metallic tang in the air deepened into a bitter, coppery taste, a prelude to something vast and hungry. Marcus Thorne, collapsing from exertion, watched as the repurposed pump hissed, ejecting a viscous, dark fluid directly into the breach, a final offering to the demanding void. Lena Petrova, her face streaked with tears that never fell, registered the catastrophic pressure fluctuations as the entity began to draw upon the rig's very structure, pulling it inward, consuming its metallic essence. Outside, the abyssal bioluminescence flared, coalescing into titanic shifting forms that pressed against the viewport, their presence too immense, too alien for the mind to fully process. The ocean itself seemed to recoil, then surge, forming impossible currents around the rig, a tempest of primordial energies. A profound, crushing force descended, not merely hydraulic pressure, but a spiritual weight, an ancient sentience reaching through the breached reality. The individual minds of the crew, long fractured, now shattered entirely, subsumed into a singular, agonizing awareness of the Leviathan rising from the depths, an entity born of starlight and abyssal dread. The silence that followed the crescendo was worse, a void filled with the unspoken knowledge of what they had unleashed, a gnawing existential terror. The rig, now merely a skeletal appendage, became an echo chamber for the burgeoning cosmic horror, its purpose fulfilled, its destruction imminent. The silence, a suffocating void following the crescendo, was not an absence of sound, but a profound negation of all familiar frequencies, a vacuum where human thought once resided. It was a pressure far more absolute than the ocean's crushing weight, pressing not on the hull, but on the very concept of existence within the Hadal Reach eye. What remained of the rig, a grotesque lattice of twisted metal and pulsating organic growths, began an agonizing inward implosion, not collapsing under stress, but being deliberately folded by an incomprehensible force. The obsidian glyphs now covered every interior surface, glowing with a frigid violet luminescence that cast no shadows, only deepening the sense of pervasive spiritual cold. The air, thick with the acrid scent of ozone and something akin to burned ozone, now carried a new, indescribable fragrance, sweet and metallic, like the coppery taste of blood, mixed with the faint, unsettling perfume of blossoming decay. Through the primary viewport, now obscured by crystalline filaments weaving outwards, Elias Vance's shattered perception registered vast, impossibly formed structures coalescing from the abyssal darkness, their scale so immense it defied optical recognition. They were not solid, yet they displaced the water, creating ripples of displaced reality that radiated outward, bending light and space in their wake. The abyssal chorus, having fulfilled its primal directive, did not cease, but subtly shifted, dissolving from distinct patterns into a continuous low-frequency thrum that resonated within the empty spaces of the crew's minds, a single insistent note, echoing an ancient hunger now roused from its aeons of slumber. The cold became absolute, not merely a lack of heat, but an active refrigeration of the soul, draining all warmth, all hope, all memory of the sun. The rig's internal systems, long dead, were replaced by bioluminescent tendrils that snaked through conduits, their light revealing the final terrible truth. Hadal Reach I was no longer a vessel, but a nascent organ, part of a greater, incomprehensible being that stretched beyond the bounds of their reality. The ocean itself, once a barrier, now served as the medium for this awakening, its depths churning with a predatory primordial intelligence. What happened to Marcus Thorne, to Lena Petrova, to Eris Thorne became irrelevant. Their individual consciousnesses had long since ceased to matter, absorbed into the collective, agonizing awareness of an entity unfathomably ancient, unfathomably vast, now reaching for the surface world. Their final unspoken scream was not one of fear, but of utter, cosmic insignificance. The cosmic insignificance of their fate was a final, agonizing truth imprinted upon the dissolving neural pathways of what remained of the crew. The Hadal Reach I, no longer even a skeletal appendage, now underwent its ultimate transformation. Its metal hull rippling, not with structural collapse, but with the insidious elasticity of organic tissue. Its rigid frame softening, distending, reforming into something grotesque and alien. Through the crystalline filaments now entirely obscuring the primary viewport, the impossibly vast structures outside began to move, not gliding through water, but unfurling with a terrible slowness, revealing geometries that devoured light, creating pockets of absolute darkness within the abyssal blackness, voids that were somehow denser, more consuming than the deep itself. These colossal forms stretched, reconfigured, suggesting limbs of impossible scale, twisting and unfurling as if shedding an ancient skin. The low-frequency thrum intensified, not in auditory volume, but in its pervasive cellular reach, a silent, demanding pulse that resonated within the very atoms of the surrounding water, stirring ancient currents into a slow, deliberate vortex. The frigid violet luminescence of the internal glyphs pulsed in frantic synchronicity with this new, terrible rhythm, their non-Euclidean angles twisting the perception of space into a grotesque, impossible labyrinth, where up and down, inside and outside, ceased to hold meaning. The air, already a chilling mixture of ozone and decay, now carried a profound, cloying sweetness, like blooming carrion on an alien world, a taste that permeated the very marrow of their vanishing forms. A sudden, massive displacement of water hammered against the remnants of the rig, not a hydraulic wave, but the sheer physical manifestation of something immense shifting its form, stretching itself into new, terrible dimensions, each movement a silent shock wave of primordial power. The deep ocean, once merely cold and dark, now churned with a predatory hunger, its vastness not empty, but filled with an awakening consciousness that had merely been dormant, awaiting release. The entity, its true form unknowable, its scale transcending human measure, began its slow, inexorable ascent, pulling the very fabric of reality taut in its wake, an ancient, star-born terror yearning for the sun's warmth, not to embrace it, but to extinguish it, to claim it as its own. The final, lingering sensation for those still remotely conscious within the dissolving rig was of absolute cold, an internal freezing that promised not death, but eternal, conscious oblivion within the belly of something truly primordial, a cold that spoke of cosmic indifference to human suffering. The cold, a cosmic indifference to human suffering, became the ocean's sole proprietor. All trace of the Hadal Reach I vanished without a whisper. Search protocols, initiated weeks later by the Arctic Research Consortium, found nothing but an anomalous thermodynamic signature, an impossible fluctuation in abyssal temperatures far below the expected geothermal activity. No debris field, no distress beacon, no oil slick marred the pristine, terrifying surface of the Antarctic waters. The only artifact ever recovered was a single encrypted data chip, ejected from a redundant black box recorder designed to withstand planetary impacts, found embedded in a chunk of impossibly dense non-terrestrial ice that had surfaced near the pole months after the incident. Its data stream was largely corrupted, fragmented into bursts of static and unintelligible low-frequency pulses. Yet, within the chaos, a single crystalline audio segment persisted, repeated on a loop. A deep, resonating thrum, followed by what could only be described as a wet, tearing sound, then a cacophony of choked human breaths, dissolving into a final collective gasp. This was immediately followed by a sound previously unknown to human ears, a vast, echoing inhale, so profound it suggested the very ocean was drawing breath, consuming not just the rig, but the space it occupied. The final few seconds of audio were nothing but an immense, resonant silence, broken only by a faint, persistent pulse, now originating from depths far below where Hadal Reach 1 had vanished. The consortium officially attributed the rig's loss to an unprecedented tectonic shift, a convenient lie to contain the unspeakable truth. But deep beneath the surface, the abyssal chorus played on, a lullaby for a newborn terror now awake and hungry, ascending through the crushing dark, its cosmic indifference a chilling promise of the doom to come. What do you think truly happened to the Hadal Reach I crew? Share your theories in the comments below and subscribe for more terrifying stories from the depths.